Prosecutors played this video in court today, the moment Myairah Carter allegedly killed a woman inside of a Southside barbershop last month. The 25-year-old is sitting in the barber chair. The victim, Rayon Williams, is standing in a mustard hoodie. The women exchange a few words, then Williams gets closer. In the next part of the video, which we are not showing, Carter shoots. Investigators say she fired several shots. In court, the defense said Carter and Williams have had run-ins in the past. He argues his client was in fear for her own life.
The barber's cape was still around her neck. That's what Ramon Pierce remembers. The shots had already rung out. His customers had already scattered, pressing themselves into the back of the shop, hearts hammering. And when the chaos settled just enough for him to look up, she was still sitting there, gun in hand, cape draped over her shoulders like she hadn't just ended someone's life. It was a Saturday afternoon in Pittsburgh, October 4th, 2025. Just before 1 p.m. on East Carson Street, the kind of neighborhood block where people come to relax, catch up, get fresh. Bona's barbershop was supposed to be exactly that. A spot. A safe one. Rayon Williams walked in that afternoon and never walked out. She was 26 years old. What happened inside those walls in a matter of seconds had been building for 2 years. A slow burn of jealousy, confrontation, and simmering rage over a man neither woman could let go of. And the moment it finally exploded, a surveillance camera caught every single frame. No audio, just cold, silent footage. But what that footage shows, and what one of the women said to detectives immediately after, is the reason this case is about to split a courtroom in two. Because the shooter didn't run. She went home, picked up the phone, and called the police herself. And when they asked her if she had to pull that trigger, her answer will shock you. That answer changes everything. But before we get there, welcome to Real Crime Stories. If you're new here, this is the channel where we break down real cases with the depth they deserve. If true crime stories like this keep you up at night, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe so you never miss a case. Now, let's go back to the beginning. 2 years before that barber's chair became a crime scene, Rayon Williams and Myairah Carter already had a problem. It didn't start with violence. It started the way so many devastating rivalries do, quietly beneath the surface, rooted in something as ordinary as romantic entanglement. Detectives would later confirm that both women had been involved with the same man. No names were ever released publicly, but his shadow hung over everything that followed. Two people orbiting the same person, each aware of the other, neither willing to step aside. That kind of tension doesn't dissolve. It compounds. By 2023, whatever fragile civility existed between them had collapsed entirely. Court documents confirmed the pair had been locked in an active, ongoing dispute. Not a single argument that faded, but a sustained conflict stretching across months. Words exchanged. Warnings issued. Run-ins that left both sides feeling wronged, threatened, or humiliated. People who knew them described a relationship defined entirely by hostility. There was no neutral ground between Rayon Williams and Myairah Carter. There never had been. What made October 4th different wasn't the animosity. That had existed for a long time. What made it different was geography, and a series of choices that placed these two women inside the same four walls at the same moment. Myairah Carter arrived at Bona's barbershop on East Carson Street sometime that Saturday morning. She took a seat in one of the barber's chairs and settled in a routine visit, at least on the surface. Staff wrapped a cutting cape around her shoulders. The shop hummed with its usual energy. Music, conversation, the buzz of clippers. Nothing about her arrival suggested anything out of the ordinary, except for one thing detectives would only discover later. Beneath that cape, Carter was carrying a loaded 9mm handgun. She didn't place it on a counter. She didn't leave it in her vehicle. She brought it inside and kept it concealed, hidden beneath the fabric draped across her lap, within reach at all times throughout her entire appointment. Whether that choice reflected premeditation or paranoia, the prosecution and defense would later battle fiercely over. But the gun was there. That much was never disputed. Then Rayon Williams walked through the front entrance. Exactly what drew Williams to Bona's barbershop that particular afternoon remains unclear. whether she knew Carter would be inside, whether their arrival at the same location was coincidence or calculation. Investigators never established a definitive answer. What surveillance footage confirmed was far simpler and far more damning. Within moments of Williams entering, the atmosphere inside that shop shifted entirely. The two women clocked each other immediately. Williams moved toward Carter's chair. Words began. The footage captured no audio, just two figures, body language tightening, the physical space between them shrinking with every passing second. Witnesses described the exchange as aggressive. Carter's defense attorney Ken Haber would later characterize Williams as the aggressor, claiming she verbally threatened Carter, taunted her, dared her, and made clear she wasn't leaving until something happened. "If you don't come out now," Haber alleged Williams declared, "I'm going to be waiting outside." Other customers registered the escalation. Some shifted uncomfortably. Nobody intervened. Owner Rayon Williams, watching from elsewhere inside his establishment, recognized immediately that the situation between the pair was deteriorating fast. He later described it as an argument between two people who clearly shared significant history, not strangers stumbling into conflict, but individuals with unfinished business finally forced into proximity. Then, according to investigators, Williams stepped forward. She made a movement toward her pocket. Carter's hand disappeared beneath the cape. What followed lasted only seconds, 3 gunshots fired in rapid succession, tearing through the noise and warmth of a neighborhood barbershop on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. Customers dove. Staff scrambled. Someone behind the counter grabbed a phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. Pierce himself was pushed against a corner wall during the eruption of panic. When the movement stopped, Rayon Williams was on the ground. Carter rose from the chair, cape still fastened around her neck, weapon still in hand, and walked out of Bona's barbershop into the October afternoon. Paramedics arrived and fought desperately to preserve Rayon's life. They performed CPR at the scene, then rushed her to the nearest medical facility. She didn't survive. And the woman who pulled that trigger, she drove straight home and made a phone call that nobody expected. She called them herself. After leaving East Carson Street, after climbing into her vehicle, after putting distance between herself and the chaos erupting inside Bona's barbershop, Myairah Carter picked up her phone and dialed emergency services. Not to report a shooting, not to claim she'd witnessed something terrible. She called to surrender. That single decision immediately complicated everything. Voluntary surrender is the kind of detail that defense attorneys love and prosecutors quietly dread. It signals consciousness, cooperation. A person who doesn't flee, doesn't vanish, doesn't board a bus to another city. On the surface, turning yourself in suggests someone who believes they acted justifiably, who isn't running because they feel they have nothing to hide. Carter's legal team would lean heavily into that narrative in the weeks ahead, but investigators weren't ready to frame it so cleanly. When detectives sat across from Myairah Carter during questioning, she spoke. She gave them details. She confirmed her identity, confirmed her presence inside the barbershop, confirmed she discharged her firearm. And then, somewhere inside that interrogation room, she said something that prosecutors would later carry straight into a courtroom and place at the very center of their entire argument. Asked whether firing had been absolutely necessary, whether she truly had no alternative in that moment, Carter reportedly replied, "No, I didn't have to shoot her." 4 words that no defense attorney ever wants their client on record saying. The prosecution immediately recognized the significance. Here was the accused, speaking voluntarily, without coercion, essentially acknowledging that lethal force wasn't the only option available to her inside that barbershop. Not a confession to murder in the classical sense, but a statement that directly undermined the foundational pillar of any self-defense claim: necessity. Under Pennsylvania law, deadly force is only legally justified when a person genuinely believes it represents the sole means of preventing death or serious injury to themselves. Carter's admission introduced devastating doubt into precisely that requirement. Defense attorney Ken Haber pushed back hard. His argument centered on context, on the reality of what his client allegedly experienced in those compressed, terrifying seconds before she fired. He insisted Williams hadn't simply approached and exchanged harsh language. According to Haber, Williams lunged, moved aggressively, reached toward her own pocket in a manner that Carter interpreted in real time as potentially drawing a weapon. My client was in genuine fear, Haber maintained. When someone advances on you aggressively and reaches for something, you don't get the luxury of waiting to confirm whether it's a gun before responding. He framed Carter not as a calculating aggressor, but as a frightened individual reacting to what felt like an imminent physical threat. A woman who had endured nearly 2 years of documented hostility from Williams, who had received prior threats, who arrived at that barbershop carrying a firearm precisely because past encounters had left her feeling unsafe. The loaded weapon beneath the cape, Haber argued, wasn't evidence of murderous intent. It was evidence of someone genuinely afraid of what might happen if these two crossed paths again, which, inevitably, they did. Prosecutors countered by returning repeatedly to the surveillance footage, the same silent recording that had already become the backbone of their entire case. Frame by frame, they walked through the sequence of events, pointing specifically to timing, to proximity, to the moment Williams allegedly moved and reached, yes, but also to how swiftly Carter produced her weapon, how prepared she appeared, how seamlessly the gun materialized from beneath that cape, as though its retrieval had already been mentally rehearsed. They pointed to the cape itself as circumstantial evidence of intent, concealing a firearm beneath a haircutting garment inside a crowded civilian space, inside a barbershop full of uninvolved customers, staff, and owner, suggested not impulsive reaction but deliberate positioning. Someone who tucked a loaded weapon under a cape before an appointment began, prosecutors implied, wasn't preparing for a haircut. They were preparing for a confrontation. At the preliminary hearing, a judge reviewed all presented material, the footage, the statements, the conflicting legal frameworks, and ruled that sufficient grounds existed for the case to formally advance. Myairah Carter remained confined at Allegheny County Jail, held without bail, facing criminal homicide charges. No trial date had been publicly confirmed. But inside that courtroom, both legal teams already understood something clearly. This case would ultimately hinge on a single, brutal question. In those final seconds before the gunfire, who was truly the threat? And the answer, whatever a jury eventually decides, may depend entirely on what they believe happened in the moment nobody can hear. Every case has a moment where the legal arguments strip away, and what remains is simply human. This one has several. Rayon Williams was 26 years old. She grew up in McKeesport, a small city southeast of Pittsburgh perched along the Monongahela River, a tight-knit community where everybody tends to recognize everybody, where loss lands collectively, where a 26-year-old dying on a Saturday afternoon reverberates far beyond a single family's grief. Those who mourned her described a young woman full of personality, someone whose presence filled whatever room she occupied. The kind of person whose absence creates a specific, irreplaceable silence. She entered Bona's barbershop that October afternoon and never returned home. Her family now navigates an existence permanently fractured by what happened on East Carson Street, sitting through preliminary hearings, absorbing legal terminology, watching surveillance footage of their daughter's final living moments played repeatedly inside a courtroom as evidence, processing grief while simultaneously processing procedure. There is nothing clean about that experience, nothing that resembles closure at any stage. Meanwhile, Myairah Carter sits in Allegheny County Jail, awaiting a trial that will determine the remainder of her existence. She is 25 years old. Whatever the circumstances that delivered her to that barber's chair on October 4th, whatever fear, history, or calculation drove the decision to carry a concealed weapon into a civilian space, She now faces the full weight of a criminal homicide charge in Pennsylvania. A conviction carries the possibility of life imprisonment. Every morning she wakes inside that facility is another morning defined entirely by what occurred in a matter of seconds inside a Pittsburgh neighborhood establishment. 2 young women, one catastrophic outcome, a dispute rooted in something as painfully common as romantic rivalry. That reality deserves sitting with. Because beyond the legal maneuvering, beyond prosecution strategy and defense framing, beyond admissibility arguments and surveillance frame analysis, this entire tragedy originated in a conflict that never needed to reach the point it reached. 2 years of accumulated hostility. 2 years of proximity to the same person. The same pain, the same unresolved tension. And at every junction during those 24 months, choices were made, individually and collectively, by both parties. Small decisions that compounded into something neither woman could ultimately walk back from. One of them can no longer make any decisions at all. What a jury will ultimately confront is genuinely complex. The prosecution carries powerful ammunition. Carter's own recorded admission that lethal force wasn't strictly required. The concealed weapon beneath the cape suggesting premeditation. The cold surveillance record of a shooting that left an unarmed woman dead on a barbershop floor. These aren't peripheral details. They form the structural backbone of a homicide argument that any experienced prosecutor would feel confident presenting. Yet the defense carries weight of its own, a documented history of conflict between the parties, prior threats, a victim who, according to witnesses and Carter's legal team, initiated the physical confrontation on that particular afternoon, a defendant who voluntarily contacted authorities rather than disappearing. Pennsylvania's self-defense statutes do permit deadly force under genuine, reasonable fear of serious injury, and genuine fear, by legal definition, doesn't require mathematical certainty. It requires credibility. Whether Carter's fear was credible, whether a reasonable person standing inside her history, carrying her 2 years of documented conflict with Rayon Williams, could have genuinely believed their life was at risk in those final compressed seconds, that determination belongs entirely to a jury. And juries, as any seasoned trial observer understands, are unpredictable. They respond to emotion as much as evidence, to how a defendant carries herself, to how a victim is humanized, to which attorney tells the more compelling story across however many days of testimony it takes to reach a verdict. Sometimes the most damaging detail in a case gets reframed so effectively by skilled counsel that it loses its sting entirely. Sometimes a single piece of footage, watched repeatedly under deliberate courtroom lighting, reveals something different on the 20th viewing than it did on the first. Rayon Williams deserved to walk out of that barbershop. Whatever preceded her death, whatever words passed between those 2 women, whatever movement she made, whatever history she carried into that building, she deserved to leave alive. She was somebody's daughter, somebody's person. A 26-year-old woman with an entire future that East Carson Street swallowed permanently on an otherwise unremarkable Saturday. Justice, in cases built on surveillance footage and self-defense claims and a 4-word admission inside an interrogation room, rarely arrives quickly. It grinds forward slowly, deliberately, through motions and continuances and procedural machinery that feels unbearable to families counting days from the outside. But it moves. And when Myairah Carter's trial finally convenes, when those jurors take their seats and that silent video begins playing again, Rayon Williams will be the name at the center of everything. As it should be.